Yo! What's up, all you gardeners out there? This is Mr. Weedman and Big Earl with the Big Earl Mr. Weedman Grow Hour. How are all you gardeners doing out there? And also, don't forget all you burners, stoners, and potheads. Hopefully, all you are doing great out there. Also, while you're listening to the show, hopefully you're smoking some big fat doinks. Big Earl, my man, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. 2023 has been good so far. How about you? Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, everybody. 2023. And Big Earl and I haven't smoked yet together for 2023, so we're going to smoke right now. Big Earl, what are you smoking, brother?
I got some chilled wine haze F2 that I loaded out, the purple pheno. So I've been liking her.
Tell us a little about that chilled wine haze.
That was the last mail I used. I'm not going to take it. I took the F2. I'm not going to take it much farther because I don't think I loved the Ice Queen Haze, which is what I was really trying to pull out of it. It was this Ice Queen Haze flavor, which is like this real sweet, rotten kind of haze. And I took it to chilled wine haze, the F2, and my favorite expression of the F2 was the same as the F1. So I thought, well, you know, why? I've got this already. This is my favorite. So I liked it because it's going to take my breeding a different way. Disliked it because I took F2s, and I'm like, all right, I'm not going to take that anymore. But I do really like the chilled wine haze F2. It's nice.
Nice.
What about you?
And I'm smoking one of your strains that when we met up that you gave me, and this is the Orange Soul. And I've smoked this on the show with Mrs. Weedman. We talk about this. Oh, you're bong ripping, baby. I love it. Bonging it tonight, baby. This is gonna be an interesting show. I love it. I'm smoking Orange Soul that was actually grown by you. And I'm sure you'll tell us all about it and who it was bred by. I'm going to hit this while you tell us a little bit about the Orange Soul.
Yeah, the Orange Soul was from Trichome Jungle Seeds, his Shiva Soul line. I've got a lot of that line. I really like the orange. There's not a lot of really good oranges out there, I don't feel like. And a lot of people shy away from them, I feel, because a lot of the oranges that I have, at least, don't get like that really nice dark like fade at the end. They stay like a light orange, a light green, and a lot of people don't associate that with like really well cured weed. But it's really, I like it a lot. It's like a citrusy funk on it, and real great plant, strong, real great yielder. Everything from Trichome's really nice.
The nugs were absolutely beautiful. We actually took some pictures of those yesterday in a video that Mrs. Weedman did. But also, it smells like orange blossoms when you open the jar up. The whiff, the smell. Even Mrs. Weedman yesterday when we were smoking it and taking pictures with it for our tray set, our smoke set. The smell, my brother, is just absolutely incredible. The high is there, all about it. The high is just nice. I was pretty stony baloney because I had to do like 3 videos and took mad rips and was blowing smoke along the tray set and stuff. But dude, I was stony baloney last night after smoking it. But man, the high, the taste, and the smell, wow! Just how did your room smell when you were growing that? Did it have that beautiful orange blossom smell like I'm smelling every time I open that jar?
So I ran that with a ton of different. That was a big pheno hunt for me. So there was one of them in there the time. I've only run it twice. Both times I've only had one of them in there. Because I do love that plant. It's super strong, super nice. And I actually I took it to autoflower, is why I'm not going to do a lot of stuff with it in our photo period stuff. But I hit it with the Pooh's Peaches, which is that last autoflower stuff I've been packing up. And I'm going to hit those seeds. I got maybe 10 of them going right now. Probably about a month. I'll hit those seeds with some Pooh's Peaches again, that same male. And then I just saved the pollens. Hopefully the pollen's going to stay viable. And then the ones that show autoflower off of that, I'm going to hit again with that Pooh's Peaches and try to keep just like the most orange pheno that shows autoflower and hope that I can bring some of that funky orange into the autoflower. We'll see.
So you just need to jar that smell up, because I mean the terpenes that come out of that smell, citrusy, the vibe that your nose gets, and it kind of gives you that awake feeling after you smell that. I mean, it is so nice for my endocannabinoid system. The smell, you just know my body's going to enjoy it. And every time I smoked it and have smoked it and smoking it now, I've enjoyed the hell out of it. So well done, my friend. Well done. Salute. It was amazing. Yes, very good. So you ready to get the show on the road?
Yeah, we'll talk about why some of those flavors came out.
That's it. So we're talking about, to me, a very not hard or difficult, but it's a very frustrating topic. And we're talking about nutrients, or some people call them newts. But nutrients is the topic of this episode. And I've had many frustrations with nutrients in my growing time since I started growing legally with my med card here in Illinois. And I've gone through a couple different types of newts, and I went organic this time around, and it's not an easy thing for me. There's a lot of numbers involved. There's a lot of mixology involved, coming from as an old bartender, a lot of mixology going on, and to get the right dosage of nutrients per your growing sessions, your seedling stage, your veg stage, your flower stage, and what you have to do in each process. And I'm so intrigued about this episode and learning more to get better at this, because it's a difficult topic of did I add too much of this, or did I not add enough of this? And this stage, when do I stop using this? And it's not easy. It's not an easy, and there's charts, and we're going to talk about the charts and the graphs and everything you can use to reference. And there's plenty of books out there, and there's plenty of listening material and that you can listen to. But this is probably going to be one of my favorite episodes for me when it comes to my personal growth. And I've had plenty of conversations with you in the last couple of years about nutrients, and you've given me some great tips and tricks and stuff to do. But this is, I think, going to be one of my favorite episodes to date, because it is such a hard, frustrating thing to do while I'm growing. So the question is to you, what are nutrients?
With plants in general, nutrients are just what they absolutely need to grow. It's going to be like with people, like we need certain things to stay alive, and then we have certain things that would be like additives or whatever you want to call it that just help us live. Like we don't need Tylenol, but that might make our joints feel a little better. Nutrients for the plant is what it absolutely needs, no matter if it's a macro or a micronutrient. No matter where it's at, it's what the plant needs to live. It's what it builds itself out of. And that's why you can see the deficiencies in it when you're going through, and we'll talk about some of that different stuff. But the plant literally just can't build it. It doesn't have that nutrient to do so.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a good start. So now the next question is, and this is the one I think I've had so many conversations with you about, because I just never understand. So there's organic versus salt. And every time I hear the word salt, it doesn't compute in my brain as being a nutrient. When I think salt, I think table salt or Himalayan salt or red, whatever. I don't think of nutrients being a salt. So this is the one I really want you to explain well, especially there might be some newbie growers that have never even heard the word salt either as a nutrient. So let's get into the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts of organic versus salt.
So the salt, and some people call it chemical too. They come in when I was at the shop for a while. They're like, "Oh, I need the chemicals." Well, which one? The ones that make them bloom. Are you talking about like a bloom fertilizer? Like, yeah. Like, that's not a chemical, but it is a salt. So a salt is something that we generally mine. We'll take it from like the sea and different stuff like that sometimes. But it is going to be completely available to the plant, which is why you can burn the plants with salt. It's already in a form where a plant can uptake it. It doesn't have to go through some kind of breakdown period with different biologies, and that's why you have to be very specific on a lot of nutrients. Oh, well, this many milliliters per gallon. Not it says 3 milliliters per gallon, not 5. Not That'll drastically change how much food is in there, you know. And so when you're talking about an organic food, this is something that is from nature, naturally occurs, but it needs a breakdown. When a plant absorbs food, it can only do it through an area so big, the cell wall so big of the root. The organics aren't naturally in that size. It takes bacteria and funguses breaking down, bugs eating bugs that are eating bacteria, stuff like that, breaking this organic food down, which is why we've seen a lot of these organic people going to or not even going to what they've been in, or like teas and compost and stuff like that, because those can create the bacterias, the biologies, the funguses to actually break that organic food down to a size where the plant can uptake it. So the big difference between salt and organic is if you're feeding, like as a gardener, if you're feeding salt, right when you feed it, your plant can eat it. If you're feeding organic, unless you're getting it from like an already made bag of like water only soil or compost, which has already had a lot of that stuff breaking down for a while, if you're like adding a raw like oyster shell, something like that, it takes a period of time. So if you have a calcium deficiency, you say, I need calcium, and you're straight organic and you have an oyster shell that needs to be broken down, it's going to take some time to do that, to where if you're feeding salts, immediately you can say, I have a calcium deficiency, I'm going to feed calcium, and immediately your plant can uptake that. So for us as gardeners, that's going to be the biggest difference. That is why most fertilizers are salts, because it's an immediate thing. It's you just feed the salt. You don't have to worry about keeping any kind of fungus, any kind of bacteria, any kind of mixture of anything alive. You don't have to worry about a lot of different stuff that you have to worry about when you're really doing organics.
Let me ask you a question about salts. Salts can be powder or liquid?
Yeah.
Okay.
BioBiz, great liquid organic company. I know there's other ones out there. That's just the one that I know the most. I know is great. There are more organics that are powder though, because it's kind of vice versa. When you go with salt people do a salt-based fertilizer like a Jax, you get that. Usually you have to put that into a liquid, dry it, and then so it takes like a whole nother step. And I'm not saying that doing the liquid isn't a step, but just from the very little bit that I've actually had a part of in those processes, when we talked about the possibilities of taking a liquid fertilizer to the salt, the powder base, and you say, okay, every teaspoon has to have the exact same amount of everything in it. You have to make basically like a slurry out of it, and then you have to spray dry it on something. I don't know all of it, but it was an extra step, to where when you talk about organics, a lot of the organics can be broken down like cornmeal, oyster shell, which we already talked about, any kind of bone shell, any kind of bone meal, all kinds of different stuff can just be organic foods. And it actually needs to go through a further process usually to be a liquid organic. So
interesting.
You see more powders, but it can be both ways.
Okay.
With organic, and you see more liquids with the salt, but it can be both ways for sure.
For the newbie grower, though, would it be easier for them just to get a liquid to start? Somebody that's just starting out, maybe their first, second, third, or fourth grow, that's not really kind of like,
do that.
Yeah.
It just depends. I think if you are doing like a water only soil, adding the powdered nutrient probably isn't super hard. You just have to predict it a little bit. Water only doesn't mean water only. It means water only for a while.
Yeah, that's where I got fucked up on my first, and actually we talked. It was during my second organic grow when I really realized, like, not only just going up in pot sizes is fine. If you're in a 2x4 by 5 tent, you only got room for 2 or 3 plants, realistically, and to go up. I went from my solo cup to my 3-gallon to my 7-gallon. Now, possibly could I put 2 10-gallon pots in there? That would have been a little tight on the pot thing, but I realize now the 7-gallon wasn't enough to just not have to add any nutrients to it. It got to like the 5th week of of flour, you had noticed something was wrong when I was sending you some pictures, because I was like, I think I need to go up another pot size. And you're like, well, just because it's 100% organic water only doesn't mean it's water only. Yeah. So I did add a little nutrients to the mix, but it was kind of too late. I mean, it helped, kept those plants going, but it didn't do, if I would have added that in like back in veg probably, or was able to go to a 10 or 12 gallon pot. Yeah. But in that, if I don't have a 10 by 10 tent or a bigger 3 by 3 tent, whatever. What I'm saying is, though, I learned from my mistakes on thinking I can go all organic and only add water when I don't have the pot size to do it in. So know that when you're trying to go all organic, you will have to use some nutrients a little bit later on in the grow, in the late veg stage, early flower stages, when I really realized that I needed to start adding some nutrients to it. Would there be anything you would recommend for somebody to use that's easy, not complicated, for the newbie dummy like myself?
So if you're buying a water only and you're going organic that way, because there's other ways to go organic too. Like if you get your own compost, if you're making your own mix, you might be able to figure something out where you're like, I never have to add food. I can add this, I can make my mix at this. But yes, for the water only, I really like Terp Tea. It's by Aurora, same people. They make a lot of different stuff. They've been in the industry for a long time. They make a bloom and a veg. I really like that. I use that a lot of that for my tea. I also use the Soul line that is by them, because it's a very organic liquid, but it still has a little bit of salt in there to help you through. They say it's most organic for a line. So I figure if I run it in my tea once a week, it shouldn't gunk up my lines too much. And it hasn't so far for 5 years. But
nice.
I also do a complete mixture that I got out of a book. Steve Solomon, he is a soil scientist. I'm not sure of all of his credentials. He's a soil scientist. I read one of his books. He had an actual outline of all the stuff. I know he's changed it a few times. But I kind of compared that to a lot of different stuff and came up with a little bit. I think I added a little bit more potassium than what he had. But I made my own mix. I put it in a 5-gallon bucket. Then I mix it up. And what I do is I put that in with – I use the same 70-30 cocoa perlite mix. But I amend one with that all-organic mix that I was just talking about making, and a few other things like insect frass and some charcoal and some different bacteria and funguses, mostly funguses, and different things. And that is what I add in flour, because I run mostly salts, but I add that hoping that I'm breaking it down in this process, and I add it and let it wash through my pot. And I hope that I know I'm sending all that to death, my biology in that at least, but I hope that it's done enough to my organic foods that I really don't have to worry about it, So
right.
That's the hope. And I can tell you, doing little things like that has improved my flavor drastically.
Well, dude, I mean, I'm fucking the orange soul is fucking, dude. But I also have smoked a lot of your other stuff too. Your acai, phenomenal flavor. Happy hour, really good flavor. And the high and the smell was fantastic. Yeah, the Ursula berry though.
That was an auto. That was Hummingbird Hills. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk to you soon. His stuff, that was an auto, so good. That's some of the stuff that made me be like, man, there's something in these autos. There's some shit here.
Yeah. I mean, so where are we at? You gave me some advice. Are we at the difference between food nutrients and additives? Is that where we're going next?
Sure. Yeah, we just talked about the organics and the salts. I like the Terp Teas, the Aurora from Aurora. Salts, the salt lines I really like. Front Row Ag I really like.
Wait, real quick. Tea.
Sure.
I've seen you do some. I've seen some other people start selling it. What is a tea? Like, what is the tea? Like, what's the mixture? Like, it's not Lipton's iced tea. It's a tea that now I'm seeing people use more and more and actually showing it more and more. What does a tea actually do for your soil?
So a tea is typically they're talking about like a fungus or a bacterial tea, which would be you basically creating an atmosphere in water for the fungus or bacteria to grow and adding that. So I add in that terp tea, they have a bunch of different stuff in there, and you're supposed to brew it for 18 to 24 hours before you add it. And so I brew it for 18 hours. I add another sugar to it because I'm assuming that is why you have to add it. Because at a certain point they run out of sugar. That's what they eat. And so I add another sugar to it and try to keep that alive basically for a little while longer. So when I feed it, any organics that is in there, I have more of a breakdown of it, because I know that I run very small pots, like 2 and 3 gallon pots. I water very often, 3 or 4 times a day, and I run a pretty decently high salt regimen. And I've run really it's going just straight organic. I've had some pretty good plants and some pretty good weed, but I could never like master it like I can these salts. And I found that even this little bit of organic additive that I'm able to do, which it's not just a little bit. It is 1 whole day a week at least. And I use my teas to like run a regalia, which is an extract that just helps boost like the immune system of the plant. It's supposed to fight off mildews and stuff. But I just like it as a plant, as an additive. Yeah, for sure. But it's expensive, so I wait till I get to the bottom and I add that. But yeah, I'm not going to use so much of that. But they're getting their hit. But yes, a tea, I've also heard people use it in just adding like a food like that. That's not maybe necessarily just an organic food, but I would think of it more as a bacteria or fungal based liquid, hopefully has a little bit or probably has a little bit of food in it that people are adding to kind of jumpstart their soil, to reinforce the troops. When you're dealing with organics, and the reason people love teas and see teas work so well, they like you have a plant outside. Well, it ate all of its available food because it's only organic. It's outside. You don't have salt all around it. It ate all of its available food. You add a tea and you see it go boom. Well, that tea gave it all the little microorganisms that it needs to break down the food that's just not available. The organic food, when you're talking about these cells in these roots that absorb this food, when it's salt, it fits through. You think of it as a door. A salt is us. Salt is us. We're good. Well, this organic is, I don't know, some kind of, giant, an elephant. You got to take that in pieces to get it through the door. Well, the funguses and the bacteria and the different little microorganisms are the butcher for that. They take that, they break it down, they eat it, they shit it out, they eat it, then someone else eats that thing, and someone else eats that thing. And it just, the whole system kind of works together with organics. So when you can water that in, you'll see a huge jump a lot of times outside. Sometimes if the food's not available even there, if you're just on like a barren dirt, like most of our freaking farmlands are now, because we plow them and just add salts and plow them and just add all salts and chemicals and plow them and just add salts and chemicals. Then when you add a tea, it doesn't do anything. There's nothing there to break down. So if you're a normal backyard, you're going to see a huge difference probably. A normal garden bed, if you're not adding a tea or a compost, very similar. Compost do very similar things. You'll probably see a big difference. If you're trying to take, a barren ground, you're going to need more than a tea probably. And this is, I'm not a professional on it, but just from what I've read, it's all an ecosystem. The tea's not just going to do it alone. But if you're going organic or you have a garden outside or anything like that, a nice tea is great.
Tee it up, yo. Yeah. Tee it up.
And that terp tea the tea's in the name of the product. It's not just a tea. It has a lot of food in it as well. There's a veg and a bloom one. It's a pretty cool product.
Interesting. So what are the actual foods a cannabis plant needs? And I know you've done such a great, if you haven't been on Big Earl's Discord yet, you need to check it out, because not only just we go on there and we do some fun stuff, he's put all of our episodes topics and some of the notes on there. So if you have any questions and stuff, you can go to his Discord. He'll give his shout out on there in a second. But it's great. And then he has all of his seeds listed too, which is fucking awesome too. I was on it yesterday and the day before. Phenomenal job. So, but you can check out the Discord. He's going to throw some charts and graphs from this topic, and any topic we move forward on, it'll be on his Discord if you want to add reference to. And we'll also post it on Instagram and stuff too, on a link too, so you can check it out. But what's cool is he's going to talk about the chart a little bit, but what MPK is, if you don't know what that stands for and you get a little lost in the sauce, so go ahead and tell us a little bit about what the plant needs.
Sure, yeah. So when we actually talk about nutrients, we talked about, what nutrients are to the plant, but what are the actual nutrients? So a lot of times on those bottles, you're walking around, maybe you've been to a hydro store, probably even like Menards and Lowe's. I don't get my nutrients from there, but I'm assuming they have NPK is what they call it on the front of the bottle. 3 numbers, usually with a dash in between them. Sometimes they're as high as, 50, 53. Sometimes they're like 0.1, 0.2. Just depends on the product you're getting. But that is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those is what are considered macronutrients. That is what the plant needs the most of. Those are things you're going to notice very quickly when you don't have enough of it, or when there's some kind of lockout on it or anything like that. So let's start at nitrogen, the first one. So the nitrogen is what people typically think of when you're growing the plant. It's what the leaf growth, the plant growth, when you see a lot of yellowing in your plant, a lot of times it's nitrogen. Calcium.
Is that from having that enough, or is it too much?
So they can go both ways. When you're running salts specifically, you can definitely have too much, but typically I would say if you're seeing a fade that looks like a nitrogen deficiency is what it is. If you have too much of something, a lot of times, you can definitely just have too much nitrogen, but your plant can only really uptake so much of it anyway that you wouldn't, I don't know how much of a toxicity, nitrogen toxicity is what they would call that.
Gotcha.
And I'm not as familiar with toxicities. I generally run on the lower side of things, or try to at least. And I still kind of deal with buildups and stuff like that way more than I deal with, what's going on here? Oh, this is a toxicity. But the people definitely get it. I've definitely heard of people getting toxicities. But for the most part, we're going to talk of deficiencies. So not having enough. With nitrogen also, especially if you've never grown before, maybe you're having a really dark weed at the end and you're not sure why. You can't get a nice fade. Maybe your weed has a weird flavor. You're not sure why. A lot of times you run your nitrogen way too late. The plant, not that it won't take it, but the nitrogen messes up the flavor if you run it. I cut mine back like week 5 or 6. It really depends on how my plants are looking. If I'm not seeing any fade at all by week 6, I definitely start cutting it back. Usually by week 6, though, I start seeing some, because I push them
quick.
Real quick. 7.
Real quick. What do you mean by fade?
When your plant is done with its main flowering period,
okay,
and it starts to go into its finish, every plant will fade a little differently.
Okay,
maybe that's not the right word, because sometimes it is actually fading in color. Sometimes it's darkening in color, so that probably wouldn't be considered a fade by most people. But the fade to me would be like after flower, before a finish, and you start to see a lot of those transitions of colors. The falls start to set in, a leaf here, a leaf there. This one's gradually changing over here, but it's not quite like on the finish week or 2.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
But a couple weeks before, I cut my nitrogen completely out before anything else. I usually have a pretty big buildup by the end of my flower. Not big to where I don't like it, but it's just thick enough to where I can rely on it to get me through that next week. And then the last week before my flush, I don't want to run any nitrogen at all. I don't want to even touch in nitrogen.
Yeah, most bottles, if you buy nutrients, you see that the bottles say 0. That's the first number for nitrogen, and you totally like that last 3 or 4 weeks. You use that. I've used that before. So when I wasn't doing the organic soil, just add water. So
a lot of those lines, depending on if it's a 2 or a 3 part, if the bloom has 0 nitrogen, the 3-part line is probably going to hold a lot of nitrogen in its micro. So a 3-part line usually with salts is a veg, a bloom, and a micro. And when you look at the veg doesn't even have as much nitrogen as the micros a lot of time, because those micros you use all the way through, and the veg and the bloom you cut out in between flower and stuff like that. But that was one thing for a while where I was like, okay, what is going on here? And I was trying to figure out. Before organics, it was really hard for me to get my plants to really express themselves. I was able to influence flavor. I was able to change flavor. I was able to enhance flavor. But it was like how I would always explain it to people. It's like a cherry syrup. No matter what you add that to, it's going to be cherry influence. Cherry Sprite still tastes, the same influence as a cherry Coke. And so when I was using all this other stuff, everything had that hint of flavor or tasted maybe exactly the same. Everything. And it wasn't until I found these organics and the teas and the different ways of trying to create that breakdown and have a food actually fed to my plants that they can use and not just flush down the drain like a lot of the organics are when you water too much, or a lot like I do. And so that's really when the flavor started coming out, is when I nitrogen, cut that out way early, and started bringing in my organics constantly. But
you know what I want to have right now?
Yeah. What?
A fucking cherry Coke. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Sorry. I'm sorry. That's what it is. There's all these like essential oil products and all these different products out there, and they're like, enhance your flavor. And it's like, well, yeah, if you really like cherry, adding a cherry syrup to effing everything would enhance the flavor for you. But I want to come out with some funk, some orange, some spice, some pine, some, I want all those different flavors to be able to come out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I actually now want a Shirley Temple. Thanks, Wes. I appreciate it.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Blame the organics. Blame the organics. Without the organics,
I'm gonna blame the Ursula's, the Orange Souls, but I'm blaming.
Yeah, that too. So nitrogen, N. That's the very first one in the NPK. The 3 numbers on the front of the bottles that you see with the macronutrients. After that, we have phosphorus, P. So most people are going to line phosphorus along with building of the flower. When you talk about a flower boost, it's usually going to be a high phosphorus with usually about half as much potassium. So usually a flower boost is going to be something like a 0, 40, 22, something like that. That's a big one. Some of them are not that big, but that's a big flower boost, something like that. It does definitely help build the flower. It does more than that, but that's when we're going to see it do the most. It also aids in root development and different stuff, and it also raises pH. So that's actually, if you look at like pH up and down, usually it would be like 0.45, 0, 0.55. Now, as far what I was always told is that the potassium and phosphorus that are in those to make the pH go up and down are not available to the plant. I don't know any of that. It is worth thinking about though, because if you have a 55-gallon res and you're supposed to add 20 milliliters of this, and then you had to add 5 milliliters of something that's a 0.055 to get it to the pH you want, it's like, well, man, that's adding quite a bit. But
for all you newbies out there, res means reservoir. For all you newbies out there,
what your nutrients will be in, unless you don't run a res. Some people don't run a res.
I don't. One day I hope to, but right now I don't.
They help a lot, because then you only have to mix food once a week if you're lucky. So the phosphorus raises the pH, and then the potassium, which is the K on the NPK, lowers the pH. So potassium also very helpful in growing the flower. I personally like potassium a lot, along with calcium, during transitions. So like when I take something from veg into my flower room, I do a calcium potassium boost. When I want to start like my fade or my finish at the end, I do a little potassium boost and a calcium boost. And I found that it helps my colors and my fades and my finishing come along a little smoother and a little nicer. And the plant seems to most all of them seem to respond to it really nicely. And it lowers the pH, which I already said, but just in case. So the potassium lowers, phosphorus raises pH. So there's ways of changing the acidity of your water with those as well.
Gotcha.
So those are macro. And then you get into the micro nutrients. And some people will even split it up. I've seen people say, well, there's a macro, micro. There's a middle guy here. If you're going to talk about a macro, micro, it's a micronutrients, but it's one that's on the top of the chain of the micros. You have calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. The reason, so CalMag is a calcium magnesium product. You see that together a lot because, and I can't remember, it's either the calcium or magnesium doesn't react well with any of the other nutrients, really. So
I think it's magnesium that doesn't work well. So it needs the calcium.
Sure, yeah, and that makes sense actually, because when you run like a Jax or a powdered 3-part, a lot of times they have you add a Epsom salt as the third part. They have an A, B, and then you run Epsom salt, and the Epsom salt is basically just magnesium and sulfur. So that makes sense as why that's not something that they would add, not even a powder. So, but so calcium, magnesium, sulfur are the high guys on the micro list.
Hold on, before you go any further, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Does CalMag solve everything that you see everyone posting? And we always make a joke out of it at the end. Don't forget to add your CalMag. Is it true or is it just a joke? Or is it like, because every time I see a meme or I see someone go, I need help with this, add some CalMag. Add some I laugh at it now, but it's a question that I think that everybody needs to know the truth about. Is it really that helpful, or is it just like just to bust balls?
I had to hit my bong for that one. Let me get a little sip real quick so I can. So it's a little bit of both. It is a joke because somebody shows a yellow plant and immediately people say, bro, calcium. Oh, you got to add more calcium. And that's not to say that it's not calcium a lot of the times. Right. But there are reasons that calcium might not be getting uptaken that don't have anything to do with adding more calcium. So if you have a line at Taco Bell at 3 a.m. and there's 5 people on that line or there's 20 people on that line's not going to move any faster. Those motherfuckers move at capacity. So if you put that extra calorie, and sometimes it can get even worse. You get 30 people in that line, all of a sudden it's circling back around. The people getting the food can't even get out. It's a catastrophe. You have a toxicity, a burn, or whatever. It's a joke that's not really a joke probably most of the time, because a lot of times it is calcium. Especially because we grow in cocoa a lot. Even our organic mixes and our mosses and different stuff, our peat moss, usually has a cocoa through it, at least a little bit. Cocoa takes calcium, uses it to bind itself to other things. I don't even know. All I know is it makes it unavailable to the plant. And so when you run cocoa, unless you run a cocoa specific line, you usually have to add a calcium.
Gotcha.
So
makes sense.
That's why it's a joke, because people say, oh, there's calcium, but they do say that for a reason, because it is that a lot. It's like overwatering. Like, hey, it's just a problem a lot. And so the first thing you say, hey, how are you watering it? And if somebody's been gardening for a long time, they might be like, well, this asshole doesn't think I'm watering right. And it's like, that's 90% of people's problems. They see a dripping plant, they think water.
Yeah. Oh shit. Now you were going to talk a little bit about the rest of the micronutrients, and then we'll move on.
Sure.
Sorry, I had to ask that question because it is.
It's a good question to ask, and we do make a joke out of it. And there's probably people that think like, is it a joke? It is kind of a joke. It's a you can get a little laugh out of it. But look into things. If you're having a problem, look into things a little bit. Don't just think calcium.
Just like your cocoa perlite, 70-30, 7% true, 30% joke.
Yes. Dude, that's a great cocoa perlite mix too. If people are looking for something that's foolproof, you can water that shit once, twice a day. You can water that shit 3 or 4 times a day. You can do whatever you want with that cocoa.
There you go.
Um,
Micronutrients.
I love it. So the calcium, we got magnesium and sulfur. Magnesium helps flower sets. It helps the plant take up other nutrients. Excuse me. We already talked about why it's paired with the calcium and Epsom salt. If you're looking for an organic magnesium that's very cheap, Epsom salt is awesome. It also has sulfur in it, which is the next macro micro. And I actually use extra sulfur. I like to put it on top of my plants twice through flower. It does kill biology, which I do try to feed that, but I kill that anyway with my high salts. But I've found that it kind of like sets in a funk. So sometimes I won't put it on there if I'm not looking for that, but most of the time I am. I want it to be as funky as possible. So
Bring on the funk.
I've had people tell me I'm full of shit for even thinking that, and maybe it's just in my head. Maybe it's because it smells like sulfur in there or something. I don't even know. But I love adding sulfur. I take a spoon and the powder, and I just powder it on top. Powderized sulfur. I love it on top of my pots twice in flour.
Okay.
A few weeks away. It does well.
Little big girl tip right there.
Yeah, the sulfur for that funk. So then we'll go with the other micronutrients. We won't get super heavy into those, but we got boron, iron, chlorine, manganese, copper, molybdenum. I think that's how you say that. I don't even know much about the molybdenum. Nickel and zinc. And I want to say again, we said it earlier, just because something is micro and macro doesn't mean it's like, oh, that's micro, it don't matter. If you don't have it, you're going to know. And you're not going to be able to get the plants that you want. So if you leave one, oh, it's a micronutrient, like you need it all.
Just when you think you don't have it, it matters.
Exactly. Yeah, agreed. But I on the Discord, I have a dope little chart that I like. And it talks about the pHs with the foods also, because not to make it a little bit more confusing, but it's not just about the food that you add, it's about the acidity of the soil and how easy it is for that plant to uptake that nutrients, because it uptakes different nutrients at different acidities. And so having it too basic or too acidic can cause a nutrient to get locked out because it uptakes too much of something else, because it can't uptake that nutrient. I look at it as hallways. You have 20 hallways, and some nutrients get a single file line and some nutrients get 3 wide lines. And as that hallway goes up and down, the acidity and the basicness goes, usually people are growing between 5, 5, and 7. 7 being if you're growing organic and you're talking about trying to support your biology. 5, 5 being if you're going straight cocoa and you're looking for that little bit lower of a pH that they seem to like, or somewhere in between. But if I'm all stony and I got off track, what was I talking about before that?
You're talking about pH under 7.
Yeah. So you're in a hallway. Basic. You're going up and down this hallway, and as you go up and down it, the hallways get wider and shorter, or wider and narrower. So at some point, when it gets too acidic, that nitrogen hallway gets too narrow or whatever it is. I don't even know which one, but the chart shows it. Will get too narrow, and it can only let through one nitrogen at a time. And it might open up a different hallway. And because of that might flood out, and you might get a lockout. You can't get up enough nitrogen now. You might have a ton of nitrogen waiting in line. Now you can't get it up. So,
that plant, that nitrogen needs some Viagra, then, I guess.
Yeah, it needs to get on the blue pill. It needs to get on it, but it acidity is very important, especially with salts. Organic isn't as touchy. So I run the organic in the water, and I break my foods down in teas. I do very little in the pots, but I like to run it at a 7 because I've heard that it's not favoring a fungus or bacteria. It has very little food in it. And so since it's so thin with food, it doesn't change the pH of my pots. because I'm usually watering like at a 5.7 to 6.1 ish. But with younglings and cocoa, I like a 5.5. So,
And you're talking about the soil pH, not water pH.
both.
Right?
So
both.
yeah.
Okay.
So the water pH is what I always measure. The only time I measure my soil pH is through runoff, and it's by comparing it to the water. So like, say I am seeing. I actually dealt with this not very long ago. I was noticing that I just wasn't getting the build that I was liking. I started getting, which is almost a dead tell, burning on the ends of my leaves a little bit faster. I like to see a little bit of burn on the ends of my leaves. It means that I'm really pushing some shit. But I don't like to see them until like week 6-ish. Like I wanted to start fading and being like, okay, I'm going downhill. Maybe week 7. It was like week 4. I wasn't seeing like a stack that I liked, and I read my runoff and it was high. And I put it in a 0.2 and it came out like a 3.4. And so if you put it in a 0.2, it comes out a 3.4. If you take the 3.4 as the middle ground there, you're talking about an extreme salt buildup. So over 2 days, I ran a week's reservoir in each day, flushed it all the way down to where it was flushing out at like a 1.6, 1.7 when I put in a 1.2, re-added my nutrients, didn't skip a beat really. I saw that little bit of burn early, and I probably did lose a little weight on that run, in particular, maybe a 5-10% drop, but everything looked great, smelled great.
That's not that bad though. That's not that bad. At least you didn't lose the plant,
Yeah, it's about, and I should have known, honestly. I run my reservoirs very like watch and look. So I run my reservoirs for 6 days, and then I have my tea for a day. And so I want them all, I go by that. Oh, it's the second day. This should be a third of the way down. Okay, it's about a third of the way down. Oh, well, this one's a little farther down than that one, and I have them on cycle timers. So this one's going a little way farther down than these two. Okay, I'm dialing this back a little bit. I'm dialing these two up a little bit. And I'm trying to keep them on their par. And then I come through with my tea on the 7th day. But it gives me like complete control of everything with only really having to do 1 res a week for everything, So 5 reservoirs a week, but only 1 reservoir a week for each area, if you want to call it that. Small area.
Gotcha. Sweet. We moving on, EC ppm?
Yeah, so the pH is the acidity, and the EC is going to be the thickness. Parts per million, people call it too. I like EC though because electrical conductivity, it is universal. When people start talking parts per million, you say, I like to run, in veg, I like to run a 750 parts per million. And in flour, I like to run a 1,200 parts per million. Well, if you're on the 500 parts per million scale, it just depends on what nutrient you're running or what you specifically follow. Way different. That means way different stuff than on 700 parts per million scale. So if you're running parts per million, you have to ask people 2 questions to really know what they're running food-wise. If you just call it EC, which has an exact correlation just like the different parts per millions, that's all it is. What's your EC? It's this. We don't have to ask, what scale do you run on? What's your parts per million? It's this. Okay, and what scale do you run? The 700. Cool. It's just EC. So I don't know why we're on the parts per million thing. I don't know why people ever got on it. But
sounds confusing.
It's dumb, and we should all use EC. It's straight to the point. But in my veg, my EC, I like to be like, it really depends. My veg, I run recirculating. So I run it doesn't have to be as accurate as my flour because it can flush through. I can water it 10 times more than my flour room, where my flour I drain to waste. And I drain to waste because that means every single time I feed that plant, I know exactly what it gets. When you recirculate, if you're a little bit low on CalMag or on calcium, let's just bring up calcium again. Well, you're a little low the first run or the first feeding. You're even more low the second feeding. The third feeding, you're even more low. The fourth, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And so when I went from recirculating to just watering to the drain, So you water it, and the runoff is the runoff. You don't use it ever again. I could really I could dial something in just much more accurately. You do use more water doing it that way, but that's what. So when you talk about the EC in veg, I usually run a little bit lower because I water a little bit more, and I just don't want that big pump. Where in flour, I'm trying to get in there. I run a way higher par. I run a CO2 enhancement in there. It's all it's a little bit more intense, So I try to give it way thicker food as well.
Okay.
But so that's EC in parts per million. You'll need to know that with your food.
I'm still not great at that. I won't use ppm because the EC is, I think, a little bit easier for me to read. I'm still not really good at that though. pH all day. I can my pH in water, and every once in a while I'll pH the runoff. But yeah, I can pH all day. But the EC I'm still not 100% great at yet. So
yeah, and the EC is hard to read. You can't really read it, I don't think, in soil. There might have a reader for it. So the EC is just the water.
Right.
Where the pH, you can read soil pH, but soil can be very spotty. So I personally like to read runoff because that can kind of be a conglomeration of everything. To where if you read a pot, if you have a 5 or 10 gallon pot and you have, because they have little meters for it, you want to read that in 4 or 5 spots, and then you want to take all those down, divide it by 5 or whatever, and get your average. And the other one's just so much easier, and I think more accurate, really.
I remember before I could tell a story because I'm an idiot. I remember
trying to read yours.
Well, here when you and I first became friends, and you told me to get a meter, and to you got to measure your pH. Okay, what do I got to buy? And you sent me what to buy. I'm fucking DMing you on Instagram because I got the fucking meter in the soil going, I ain't reading anything. It ain't reading shit. And I got it in the soil. I'm taking pictures yo, fucking dude, it's for the water. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I do.
I got the fucking in the soil. Going, it ain't working, man. Earl, what am I supposed to do? It ain't working.
Take it back. That's funny.
I'll never forget that. You're the only one. Well, now the world knows, but you're the only one that knew that for a long time. And ever since, I think maybe Mrs. Weedman might have known about that, but you were the only other person. Everybody knows what a dumbass I am.
Dude, that is not you should have heard. We had people that would come in and they'd bring in their timers. It wouldn't even be timers they'd buy from us, and they'd be like, we've set these up for us. And not just one person, multiple people. And you'd be like, oh, okay, I'll set them up for you, And they'll have us a list and 8 timers. I need this one for this one for that, this one for this, and just it's just different, man.
I finally went to YouTube after talking with you. I finally went to YouTube, their YouTube channel, whatever the fuck, and I watched videos on how to do it all. And that's when I was like, oh, you're fucking, because I don't read radio fucking instructions very well. So
sure, yeah, it really helps to see stuff for me.
Yes, so that's what I had to do. And then between you and the video, I was like, oh, I'm a fucking dumbass.
Dude, it
ain't working. Big girl, it ain't working.
But you're figured out now. And now you got all your pH problems handled.
All right. How should someone... I'm still laughing about that. Fucking so stupid. All right. How should someone start their exploring the nutrient world? What do they need to do?
So what I would do, I started a lot of my explorations in a shop because people came and they gave me their line. Because if I like their line, if somebody comes in and say, what do I want? You say, here's what you want. I run this and it's great. But what I would say is start with some books. There's some awesome books out there. Just do some research, I'd say. But some as far and it really depends on how you want to go, I guess, is what it's hard to say. Tons of different books. If you want to go organic, tons of good books for organic. If you want to grow outside, tons of great books for outside. I personally like to read Jeff Lowenfels if you're talking about organic. and soil science. Same with Steve Solomon. That's almost all the only books that I've read about that, to be honest. Listen to a lot of their podcasts and stuff too. So that's a great place to start for sure. And I think also start with just one line. These companies are smart. A lot of these, especially if they've survived this long, they're smart, and their lines that they put out are pretty well rounded usually. So start with one line, and then just do some substitutions. Say, okay, this line's doing this. I want to substitute this for that. It's really about what you want to see, what fulvic acid does. Put a fulvic acid in there. You want to see what a monosilicic acid does? Add a monosilicic acid to the base that you run. But that's what my very first run, I would run one line and their base only. And I would see how it acts. And then I'd add stuff from there and say, did I notice it? Keep some notes. I spent $100 on this nutrient for this run. How much did I get out of it? I got an extra quarter. Not worth it to me. Woo. Or, I got an extra half pound. Okay, I'm keeping it. Yeah. So it's like, that's what I would do. But it's awesome. The books and the knowledge that's out there now is so badass compared to even 5-10 years ago. Like it's everywhere. There's some bad knowledge too, but just know there's a million ways to do everything. So if somebody's saying, no, you got to do it this way, yeah, it probably works for them. But
yeah, check Big Earl's Discord. I'm melting thanks to the orange soul. I'm like keep on sliding down the chair. I'm melting so well. But check Big Earl's Discord for the books. He'll post them in for this episode too in his Discord, so you can get the books in there too. So that'd be dope. What can you read the chain? Can you read and change your nutrients, EC and pH?
Yes. So reading your nutrients is hard in terms of like, oh, there's this much this much that, this much this. What I do is, so I have my line that I always run. Well, I know after I add the very first part of my line, my monosilicic, I know that my water comes out at a 0.2 EC. After I add my monosilicic, it's still a 0.2 EC. It's no food in that. Then I add my part A. And I know after I add my part A, it goes up to 1.2, maybe a 1.1. Depends on what week and different stuff. So I can go back. I can say, I can be in the middle of my nutrients, basically, go back, read my EC and say, okay, I'm pretty sure I was here and I know I was here. Or I can come back and read it and say, man, did I forget? Because I have like 12 or 13 things. It changes week to week. I can read my EC and say, okay, I'm off somewhere at least, so I can know to flush it maybe. Say, I don't want to, did I not put a vital part in? Because I'd rather flush my reservoir than not have something. Like if I don't think it's vital, if I'm like, okay, I know I put the base in, I can't remember if I put in the monosilicic acid. I probably won't do shit. Because it's like, I'm not wasting that. The monosilicic acid does help keep things a little bit more rigid and a little upright and helps with a couple of different things like that. My plants aren't going to die without it. But if I don't put in the Epsom salt, plants are not going to be super happy. So you can read it that way through the EC. But as far as reading it and saying you have this percent of this percent of that, that's something you'd have to send off for. And the pH is the same way. You can read the pH and the EC through like digital meters ranging from $150 up to, like, if you get scientific and crazy about it, up to higher than I probably know. But my meter, I think, was like $300. Has both of them on a long string. I take them from reservoir to reservoir. They're very nice. It reads EC, pH, and temperature. And the EC you can change from the 700 to 500 part on the parts per million also. So you can go EC, parts per million 500, parts per million 700.
There was the one that you recommended. There was the one you recommended for me. It was just the two handheld ones. I can't remember the name of the company. That was that. Which one?
Hannah.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's the one I got. It's perfect. I don't know. It was like $50, $45, I think. Maybe even cheaper.
It's great. And it has a brother to yours that is the EC meter, exact same model.
I stuck that in the soil too, going, Big Earl, if it's not working.
And that I love, man, to know your plants are flushed is so nice to be able to read your runoff and say, I'm putting it in at 0.2. It's coming out at 0.3. I know my shit is bare. It's been bare for 24, 48, whatever you like to run. And you know you can flush. You know, because it's hard sometimes. Like, especially if you say, you gotta flush fast, or you're going on vacation next week and you're gonna run these 9.5 instead of the 10, and you're gonna flush for 4 days instead of 7 or 8. Like, to be able to read it and say, I know I'm signed for flush. I know I need to do this is nice with the ECU. A lot of people undervalue that. pH is almost a must unless you're straight organic, in my opinion, at least.
I still when I was doing the organic soil, when I wasn't adding the first one I did, I still tested my pH every time I was watering. You know, because you got to do the pH up, pH down. You know, I run my stuff through a Brita filter to get all the fucking shit out of it. You know, I run it through twice. You know, it goes, you know, and then I put it in my container for a couple of days, you know, and then I, you know, I test the water out before I add my nutrients to the water, yada, yada, yada. But when I wasn't adding nutrients to the water, when I was doing organic, I still tested my pH, making sure it was in that level I wanted to be in the mid 6s or the low 6s, or depending on the stage of the grow. But that's always. Because if here's the thing, if you have bad water, like here in Illinois, in the Chicagoland area, the pH is very high. I mean, you're talking about 8.5 to 9% throughout the whole year. So you got to use a pH down to get that down to where you want it to be. So if you just take that water out of the sink and you use that to water your fucking plants, you're going to kill them. That water here in Illinois is so acidic. It's good. It's pretty good. It's pretty decent drinking water, you know, but to feed your plants with your cannabis plants with it, no.
Ours is really nice. It comes out right at 7. I run a charcoal sediment filter before all my water, and it comes out at a 0.2 EC, which is pretty low. And then I run an RO to like humidifiers, just because I don't want that having anything in it. But our water is really nice here. We're lucky that way. I think it comes from the Huron. Get it from Detroit. I think they get it from the Huron.
Oh, lucky.
Yeah, one of the big lakes.
How do you dial in nutrients for a specific plant? Like, what's your speciality?
I do. Okay, so this is something I really like. So I run so many different plants, so many different seeds. Almost every run, quote unquote, so I run a perpetual garden. So half of it I have going week 1, half of it I have going week 5, 6, and it, you know, flips through that way. So I pretty much every 5 or 6 weeks I'm pulling something down. And because of that, I have found that it's really hard to keep all your plants extremely happy running. So if you have 30 plants on one reservoir, it's this plant wants this plant wants that. This plant's really dark, and it's like, man, I want to take some of that nitrogen out. This plant's really light, and it's like, but that one I want to add it to. You know, and in situations like that, I will add nitrogen to like a top feed and be like, I'm just going to give this one a nitrogen boost without touching anything else. But I have found to dial in a single line or a single plant. So that aside, so how I've found to dial in a single plant through all these ones together would be by just starting with that plant in a base, something you're comfortable with. Rather that's, okay, I'm really comfortable with this single line. I'm really comfortable with these particular products, whatever it is. Start with that. And then you bring in, this wouldn't be so much, I guess. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead on our chart. I'm like, that doesn't even sound right. Nutrients for a specific plant is going to be a little deeper than the nutrient, but you do need to have a base that you know exactly what you're running for that plant.
There you go.
But it's going to be more than that nutrient also. You need to have everything else right, because if you're running a really high PAR and your CO2 isn't high enough, you're getting these weird burns, or you're not having enough of this or enough of that. It might not be because of a food problem, you know? So when you're dialing in for a specific plant, know your line, know what you're giving to it, and really pay attention to the plant, have everything else right, and document. Write it down. You notice this, write it down. Look for things to really notice. And that's what I would do to dial in a specific plant. If you want to like run tons of plants, right? I would also start kind of the same way. Start by running a single line. I would add as many sources of a single nutrient that I could get. So if it's like nitrogen has multiple sources you can get to add to your plant. The reason I do this is my theory on different nutrient sources. This isn't something that I've read. It's just something that I try to do when I'm doing a hunt. Is because when I've had 40 or 50 plants on one reservoir, I have found that if I add I have a base, a veg product for this and a veg product for this, if I brought in multiple products and use 2 different bloom boosts, use a couple different sources for that, I would especially for calcium. If you look at some CalMag products, they'll have 2 or 3 sources of calcium, mostly 2 or 1. But if you can bring in multiple sources of calcium, hit it with an organic, hit it with all this different stuff, your plants, you can really find these niches to make all your plants very happy. And I like to talk of it like a buffet. If me and you walk into a buffet and we want, let's say, protein is phosphorus, and so we want our P, and I go to chicken and you go to steak because you like steak more and I like chicken more. Well, it doesn't mean you wouldn't eat the chicken and I wouldn't eat the steak to get our phosphorus, but it does mean that if you had the steak and I had the chicken, or we had what we preferred, we might eat more. So that's my theory there on if you want to run multiple plants, or even if you just want to make multiple things happy off of one food source or off of one feeding, to try to find multiple food sources of each nutrient.
I like the theory. It's good. The big Earl theoryisms. I like it.
It works for me. It works really well. That's really why. So the tea was great for the flavor for sure. But when I first started thinking of it, that was one of the things, because I was like, so how am I going to add all these different sources? And when you go into organics, it can really deepen the menu of what you can add to get this and that. In salts, there were some different things, but it was it was way easier to find isolated in organics. Like a lot of the isolations in the salts where you're just getting just potassium, just phosphorus, stuff like that, were all sourced from the exact same thing. Like some kind of nitrate or something, Like you'd go down to it, like, okay, this is 55% this, but what is 55% this kind of potassium, and this is 45% this kind of potassium. They're both the exact same potassiums. So it doesn't make much sense for me to add this and this then at that point. At least that's how I was thinking of it.
That's cool. I like it.
I jumped around on you a little bit.
That's all right. I understood it. Once you came back, you reeled yourself back in. It made sense.
I wanted to jump right to my theory. I'm very proud of my multiple nutrient source, because I've told that to a few people and they've used it on different instances and they've agreed with me. So
that's good. Yeah,
exactly.
That's good. They agreed with you. That means it works. That means you can go move forward and you keep on getting better at that multiple theory source. I like it.
If you got 1 tray of food or 20 trays of food, you'll probably eat more if you got the 20 trays,
I like it. I like the buffet line fucking synopsis kind of ingrained in your head. Made me understand it as just like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks, Big Earl. Made sense to me. Fucking A.
Yeah.
We got a question. Did we get a question from somebody that we haven't answered yet? We got a new question. Don't forget, everybody, if you send us a question, if you send Big Earl or I or both, DM us both, it don't matter. Send us a question. We'll get it on the show. We'll answer it on the show. So we'll also send you a DM answering it too. But yeah, just please don't forget. So this is Sweet Leaf Gardens, right? That's the Instagram. And the question is to you, Big Earl, is how can I get a larger yield?
Yeah, so they had asked that a while ago, and we're just not getting it on here. I'm glad we can talk about that. There are tons of ways to get a larger yield. Perfecting your environment, different stuff. Three things. If you like a plant, you're saying I want this specific plant, trying to get a larger yield. because a lot of yield is based off of your genetic, But this specific plant, trying to get a larger yield, first off, throwing down more actual power in your light. That is going to be like the single most, boom, like this exact, it absorbs it, it can make it bigger. That's going to oftentimes need also a CO2 boost and a food boost. It's kind of all ingrained into one. You can't grow something bigger without everything. If you want to build a building, you can't have all the metal and wood there and no screws and bolts. You got to have everything there to build it. So that's the first thing is that I would do would be to add more PAR, CO2, and food to it.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
Since you mentioned CO2, this is something interesting, and I don't remember the name. Someone sent me a pic of it. I got to find it. I don't have the room for a CO2 tank in my where I grow at, and I've been wanting to do CO2, and I've heard for years. Oh my god, for years. CO2 for bigger buds. Sure. Someone sent me, a friend of mine. I don't know what I did with the fucking poster. I posted CO2 bags that last for like 5 months. Mushroom bags. Yes.
Yeah, they're mushrooms that grow CO2. So it really depends on how you're growing. I've done tons of different mushroom bags and had a lot of people like them and dislike them. If you're venting out your tent, unless you're in a very small room, they're probably not going to do a ton. Their biggest advantage is going to be putting them right over your plant in a warmer area. So usually people put them right above their light. CO2 is heavier than the oxygen. It falls down over the plant. Even if the tent's CO2 is only at 600 or 700, falling on your plant's actually going to be a little bit more concentrated. At least that's what the bag people tell you. Some of them, at least the salespeople I talk to. So, but I've definitely used bags, and I've definitely used bags for longer than that. They say that. I think it's like 6 months on some of them, a year on some of them.
Yeah, man, that was crazy. I got to try that on my next grow.
Yeah, it can, and it's really like there's a chart out there that has CO2 to PAR. So it says, listen, if you're getting this much light at your flower, you need to have it this much CO2 is what it needs to build, because it really has to have all of it. Just adding extra light isn't going to do it. You have to have now. If you have a very low PAR and you're adding your extra light, and your extra lights get you to like a 500, and then you say, okay, well, I'm running, my basement's naturally getting a 400 CO2 usually, or my kid lives down here and it's CO2 city down here. Pets like to stay down here. I got 800, 900 parts per million CO2. You might be sitting there and you might be able to add some light and not even have to add CO2. Most outside, I think, is usually like the late 3s into 400s on the CO2. Plants evolved. Most of the plants, the cannabis plant evolved like the 12 to 1500 CO2. So you can get up to that, and anything over that, I think they found doesn't help a lot or might be a little wasted. But if you're maxing out your PAR, you can definitely use that CO2. You need it, and the food. You need the food. But another way, so you have your setup. You want to get larger yield right now. This plant, clean your bulbs and your lights. Those reflectors. So especially if you have bulbs. If you have a LED, you have a diode, maybe they're a little dusty. Clean those for sure. You want to clean them.
What can you clean that? Can you clean them with just a little little wet paper towel? What can you use on that?
I like alcohol. Towel? They make rags specifically for it, but they're basically alcohol, because alcohol just doesn't leave a streak usually.
Can you use like a TV cleaner or screen cleaner rags?
Yeah, I think so. Just make sure it's not on. It's not going to come on, and things are going to dry. The big thing, especially with bulbs, if you have like a 1,000-watt bulb or something big, for sure, when you get those spots on there, they get warmer, and I've seen bulbs explode because somebody sprays. And that spray leaves a mildew on the bulb, and then that bulb gets warm. And it probably wasn't the first time that bulb got sprayed, but eventually it gets warm enough and gets so much buildup that it gets warm enough to break. Gotcha. So, but cleaning those, you should definitely be cleaning those every run. A lot of those reflector companies say you need to change the reflector out. Some of them, I won't even say names, just because it was literally their salesperson that said it. Said they suggest you change your reflector out every 6 months. It's like, bro, every 2 runs you want people to change out their reflector? That's like some single-headed HPS numbers. Like, that's wild. 2 runs? Like, I don't know. That's just, it's like not feasible. So they said, well, we would say it would make up your money if you did that, because the reflectors, man, they'll get tarnished and they'll get dirt on them. And if you're running a bulb, that's half of your light is going up and out. If your reflector's already, you have a really new reflector. Let's say your reflector's at 90% when it's clean, but it's dusty. So it's at 90%, and then it's dusty. So now it's at 60%. So you're getting 60% of 50%. So you're automatically losing. I don't know what that number is, but it's like 25%, So there's already, you lose it to your reflector. And when the plant can't absorb that light, when it hits that reflector and it can't get absorbed by the plant, it turns into heat. You get a warmer room that way. If your plant can absorb it, it doesn't turn into heat. So clean the bulbs, clean the reflectors. That's as much as you can, really. I know it's hard to do with plants. You don't want to do it with plants under them. I never want to, at least. But at least every run, just make sure when you take a plant out, clean everything. I'd say the last way would just to be a PK boost, a third way in general. So, add the extra light, which you need the food and the CO2 for, and then you have the cleaning your bulb and everything. But they make a food product called a PK boost. If you're not running a PK boost specifically, usually it's like a 0. They can run all kinds of numbers, but a big one's like a 0, 50, 40. And a little one would be like a 0, 12, 8 or something, So, but a PK boost, they just adding that extra potassium and phosphorus during the flower period, like week 2, 3 through like 6, 7-ish. You can see some increased flower even without adding extra light and stuff like that. It just, at least with me, I saw some extra oomph.
That's right. Well, hopefully we answered Sweetleaf_Gardens question. And like I said, send questions to us. We'll be happy to answer. And man, Big Earl, it was a great show. You got anything else to say before we go?
I don't think so. I mean, don't forget the cow mag for sure, but that's about it. Now you know why.
Hey, everybody and all you gardeners out there, thanks for listening. We appreciate you around the world. And don't forget to check out Big Earl's Instagram at Earl217. And his link tree is there too. Then you can link up to all of his Discord and all that fun stuff. And then you can check out 8decades.com for all our handles too. And we appreciate y'all out there in the world. Like Big Earl says, don't forget the Cal Mag. Peace out, everybody.
See you guys.